All right, so welcome everyone to the Jupiter-Saturn webinar that we are looking at patterns. We are looking at all kinds of things today. So I will share my, once I get it back to the right page here. I was looking at it prior to everything. There we go. Okay. Let's see, the Jupiter-Saturn webinar. All right. Oh no, my chat disappeared. Okay, here we are. Let's see, Regina says, can you turn the volume up a little bit? All right, let's see. I have my mic right here. Let me know, is that too loud now or is that okay? Hi, and Heather's here, everyone. So a big shout out to Heather. Thank you so much, Heather, for helping me with this and promoting it to your audience and your students. I really appreciate this. Yeah, and I'm super excited. Super excited. Okay, the sound is the same. It depends on our system. Okay. Oh, all right. So everybody can hear. Okay. All right. All right. Yeah, Yelena, Heather is a rock star mentor. She is. If it wasn't for her, I would not have the confidence of being an astrologer, you guys. So definitely, if you are not an astrologer and you have not taken the Cosmic Academy of Astrology and you're dabbling, you should take the Cosmic Academy of Astrology over on astrologywithheather.com for sure. Yeah, same, Yelena. Okay, Jupiter and Saturn. All right, let's see. There we go. So this is what we're going to expect from this webinar. For those of you that are here live with me, we're going to be going through this case by case by case. For those of you that are watching the replay, same thing. And I definitely encourage people to ask questions, definitely in the Q&A section. The chat is for everyone to kind of chat, and we're going to be looking at specific dates of the previous, right, Jupiter-Saturn squares. So if you have stories that you want to share of experiences that you had around those times, by all means, share them in the chat. I am going to close it because it is kind of distracting to see it pop up. So we will get back to that. So we're going to be going over this layer by layer, kind of the way we do in the Cosmic Academy of Astrology. For those of you that are students and you know what's going on, we put things together in layers. So first we need to know what Jupiter and Saturn are, what they represent, kind of the significations, right? And the correspondences with them, and the signs that they rule over, and what those signs represent as well. Because they're similar, there's overlap, but it's not exactly the same, right? And then we're going to look at a brief overview of the Jupiter-Saturn cycle, right? We're going to look at the Great Conjunction of 2020, because we wouldn't be here talking about this if there hadn't been a conjunction and a new beginning in terms of the area of focus for Jupiter and Saturn, and this opening mutation that we're having. So we're going to look at previous Jupiter-Saturn squares. I have the two previous opening squares to look at. And then we're going to look at this opening square. And this opening square is happening 3 times and over 4 signs, right? So squares usually happen between 2 signs, but when planets move signs, it brings in significations of those signs as well. And we're going to enter the twilight zone a little bit, because in my research, I found something very interesting. So we're going to enter a twilight zone, and we're going to talk about that. And then we're going to get back to what's going on with the opening square. And then potentials, right? After we evaluate and look at what has happened previously in the Jupiter-Saturn squares, we're going to look at the potentials of what can come about. And then what's next, right? Which is the trine. So let's jump in. All right. So Jupiter, what is Jupiter? Jupiter is considered the great benefic in astrology. It is the planet that can bring expansion, opportunities, things like that. It's the most beneficial planet in our solar system. Healings and blessings, right? Wherever it is located in your chart, usually there is a protective quality as well as an interest in expanding your consciousness in the sign quality that it's in, right? So some general Jupiter significations are growth and expansion, right? Jupiter is associated with growth, be it physical, intellectual, spiritual, or financial, right? Jupiter, I've seen this in the second house with a client of mine. They have both benefics, Jupiter and Venus, in the second house. And the conversation was money comes easy. And it's crazy how money comes easily to them, right? Venus is a connector, Jupiter is an expander. In the second house, it happens that money flows easily to them. So that's something to, if you have Jupiter in the second house, you will notice that money seems to come to you, not just when you need it, but there is also an excess that comes in at times, right? It's not everyone and all Jupiter second house placements, but it happens. Optimism and fortune, it's known as the planet of luck, right? If you know anyone that is either happy-go-lucky or is super positive, or seems to have things easily fall into their lap, they probably have a well-aspected or well-placed Jupiter. Prosperity and abundance. Jupiter's influence is linked to prosperity and abundance. And so wealth and opportunities, it's not always money, right? Prosperity can also be someone that has a farm and they expand on their growth potential with the farming, right? It doesn't always have to be money. And abundance is not always money, but it can be with Jupiter. Higher learning and wisdom. So Jupiter governs higher education, philosophy, the pursuit of knowledge, encouraging a deep understanding of life's bigger questions, right? The answers to those questions and the themes in life. Jupiter is one of higher reasoning, right? Where Mercury is our kind of day-to-day intellectual thoughts, Jupiter is, well, how does all this fit into the bigger picture? What is the bigger picture, right? And how do I fit there? Right, all of that. Exploration and travel. I've seen some pretty prominent Jupiter placements where people are constantly traveling, right? And so Jupiter rules long distance travel, exploration, promoting a desire to see the world and experience different cultures, right? So it brings an expansion of wanting to understand new and different people and people that are maybe at a distance from you, right? That's Jupiter as well. Okay. Legal matters and ethics. It's associated with law, justice, and ethical behavior, right? Our morals, our ethics, our soapbox, our morality, fairness as well, and our moral reasoning. How we gauge what is right, true, and just in the world, and what's right and wrong, right? Morally, in that aspect. And we each of us have our own understanding of morals and ethics and what that means. Some people are more loyal than others. Some people follow the letter of the law more so than others, right? And we know this because we see this in society all around us. Spirituality and religion. Jupiter governs spirituality and religious activities, enhancing one's spiritual growth and understanding of religious practices, right? So Jupiter can definitely bring in that dogmatic belief system that religion has, as well as that more expansive quality of all religions are one. There's a grain of truth in every single religion around the world, that type of thing. Generosity and altruism. So it fosters generosity, kindness, goodwill, encouraging acts of charity and benevolence, right? Jupiter is the one that bestows upon you. It's not, we'll get to Saturn. It's not the hard taskmaster of Saturn where it's you did this wrong, you need to do it again, right? Jupiter is one of kind of a more gentle approach. Freedom and adventure, right? Planet's influence brings a love for freedom, adventure, breaking new ground, often inspiring changes in life direction, right? Whereas you can see in some instances where you have this epiphany of what you want to do, right? Jupiter is usually involved in that. And it can change your direction in life for the better, right? So think of I like recently I took a tarot course, and Jupiter is definitely the wheel of fortune where it can change your circumstances. Um, Excess and indulgence. While largely beneficial, Jupiter's influence can also lead to excess and overindulgence, as its expansive nature knows no bounds. It can definitely be that overindulgence, overdoing things, right? If you think of, I sometimes will jokingly call Jupiter the frat boy of the zodiac, because it's the party that knows no limits and you're still partying when dawn happens. So these are 10 examples of what Jupiter can represent, right? And so before we move on, I will check in with the chat. Let's see. Yes, I am sending out a replay. Yes, Colleen, I will be sending out a replay once this is all done. Those of you that are here now will get the replay. Those of you that did purchase and were not able to attend, you will also get the replay. Okay. All right. Oops. Whoa. Uh-oh. There we go. All right. Sorry, my computer is being wonky. Now it won't move. Let's see. There we go. All right. So on to Saturn. Saturn is the great malefic, or the great contractor. So in astrology, Saturn is often seen as extremely challenging, but ultimately rewarding, right? So you cannot discount the challenges that Saturn brings. It does represent structure, responsibility, and hard lessons, right? Especially those hard lessons. So I heard someone once say that the school of life of Earth is the lesson of hard knocks, right? And so Saturn is very much that. It is the taskmaster. It is the contractor. It will make you do, it's like that grandparent or that teacher. And for me, it was my grandmother who homeschooled me a little bit. I had to write the same line over and over and over again until it was absolutely perfect, and my hand was aching and cramped and all of that, right? So it's those things that until you do it the right way, Saturn is going to make you redo it, right? So that's Saturn. Discipline and responsibility. Saturn is associated with discipline, responsibility, and duty, often demanding hard work and perseverance. So wherever Saturn is in your chart, wherever it is in the sky, it demands that you work hard and you persevere, right? That's what's going on there. Structure and order, right? Saturn is very much the boundaries that we face, right? Our skin is a boundary. Our house is a boundary between us and the outside world. Our town is a boundary between us and, again, the greater world around us. So structure and order, it governs structure and order, helping to establish systems, routines, and rules that provide stability, right? Saturn is nothing if not stable and long lasting and grounded. Limitations and challenges. Saturn tests through limitations and restrictions, presenting obstacles that require maturity and fortitude to navigate. And so Saturn is definitely one of those planets where it makes you be more responsible because you have to be wherever it's traversing, and wherever it is in your chart. Time and patience. It represents time and the passage of time, emphasizing the importance of patience and timing in achieving long-term goals, because Saturn is nothing, right, if not over the long haul, because it takes sometimes much longer. It can take longer for people to mature. It can take longer to get a project or even a business going. It can take longer to build a home, depending, right? What's going on. Karma and consequences. Saturn is linked to karma, dealing with the consequences of past actions and learning from them, right? So, what did you do early on that is now causing consequences in your life? And consequences can be positive or negative, right? This is something that I tell my kids all the time. Consequences are just that, they're consequences, cause and effect. What did you do and what happened after that, right? What did you influence to come back at you? That's karma. Okay. Authority and ambition. So it influences authority figures, hierarchies, one's ambition, so our personal ambitions, often highlighting power dynamics and career aspirations. It can be all of that. Endurance and tenacity. Saturn rewards endurance and tenacity, valuing sustained effort over time, right? And the ability to overcome adversity. Definitely. If you are a night-born person, definitely you can attest to that, spinning your wheels and trying to do things and feeling like you're taking 2 steps forward and 1 step back and having to continuously push and do and push and do. That's definitely a thing with Saturn. Maturity and, practicality and realism. It fosters a practical and realistic approach to life, encouraging a focus on tangible achievements and pragmatic solutions. So this can definitely be more closely related to the Stoicism, right? If any of you know what Stoicism is or have looked into what Stoicism is, it's definitely a very Saturnine way of living versus like the Jupiterian way of living. Maturity and wisdom. The planet promotes maturity, wisdom, and a depth of understanding, often maturing aspects of personality and decision making, right? So the older we get, usually the better our decision making is because we have more experience as we get older, right? Fear and insecurity. Saturn can also represent fear and insecurity, revealing areas of life where one feels inadequate or fearful, prompting growth through confronting these feelings, right? So Saturn is the planet where you have to go through, right? You can't skirt around it. You can't ignore it. You can't brush it under the rug. You have to face it head on with Saturn. Okay. And so now I will check back into the chat, see. Anna says that anecdote about Saturn was so powerful. Big unlock. Oh, well, good. I'm glad it was helpful. Okay. Let's see. All right. You all are quiet today. Soaking it all in, I imagine. All right. And so now, whoops, I skipped a page. Here we go. So now we're going to look at the signs that Jupiter and Saturn govern over, right? And so it's 1/3 of the zodiac, you guys, right? So traditional, we're going to look at traditional, Jupiter ruling Pisces and Saturn ruling Aquarius. And so you can see, especially when we had Saturn in Aquarius traversing that sign, we saw how easily the top-down control and future goals and orientations with future thinking with Aquarius, how that worked out, right? And how that played out for us. So Sagittarius is adventurous and freedom loving. I don't know any Sagittarians that want to stay in one spot for long. They either need to be learning something, they need to be traveling somewhere, or they need to be connecting with diverse and different people, right? Definitely that desire for freedom and exploration. Optimistic and forward thinking. The sign is eternally optimistic, right? Looking at the brighter side of life and focusing on positive outcomes. Not 100% of the time, but a lot of the time. Philosophical and intellectual. Sagittarians seek knowledge and truth, often engaging in philosophical thought or exploring different cultures and belief systems, right? So it's that expansive quality that falls under Jupiter's domain, right? People want to understand and seek out knowledge and understand things. Honest and direct. They are known for their blunt honesty. And I know several rising sun, moon, Sagittarians. They are very blunt and very honest and very straightforward. Um, I have noticed a little bit of tactlessness, but it's not for any nefarious means. It's more because they want to understand. They don't understand. So they're going to ask you the question in a direct manner to understand. Capricorn is disciplined and responsible, right? We can see the influence of, those Saturnine qualities here. Capricorns are the epitome of discipline and responsibility, taking their duties very seriously. They are definitely very studious and responsible at a young age, for sure. Practical and pragmatic. The sign is practical, preferring realistic and tangible outcomes over theoretical or abstract ideas, right? So it's a very physical, very tangible. It's an earth sign. It's very real. Ambitious and determined. Capricorns are highly ambitious, and it's not always work related with Capricorns, right? So ambitious and determined depends on what they're ambitious and determined to do, right? It's not always work. It's not always fame and fortune. It can be, someone that is just determined to build their own home. And so they do it from scratch and they do it from the basement up, right? That can be a Capricornian influence in terms of ambitious and determined to do what they're going to do. Reserved and conventional. They tend to be reserved, valuing tradition and often adhering to conventional norms. When we're looking at Capricorn as a sign, it's very much a backwards looking traditional sign, right? So it's more about tradition and upholding and preserving tradition versus what we're going to talk about next, right? Aquarius. Ooh. Ooh. Too far. Okay. Aquarius is innovative and original, right? Aquarians are known for their innovative ideas and original thinking, often very much ahead of their time, right? So these are the people that think to the future, that think, in 20 years, what do I want to be doing? What do I want this to look like, right? And so they're the visionaries. Independent and unconventional. This sign values independence and often takes an unconventional path, breaking away from societal norms. People don't think Aquarians are stubborn and dogmatic just because they are so radically different than what you would see in a Capricorn individual, but they are still, it's a fixed sign, stubborn, dogmatic. And that's not to say anything negative about them. It's good to be that way at times. Humanitarian and idealistic. Aquarians are often deeply humanitarian, concerned with social issues, and often involved in efforts to make the world a better place, right? They want to see the world be better, do better, people act better, right? Intellectual and analytical, highly intellectual, enjoying complex ideas and discussions about the future, technology, and society. And these are just as a reminder, we're going over these signs because these are the signs that both Saturn and Jupiter rule, right? And so there's overlap between the two. And I wanted to kind of emphasize and build it as we go. Pisces, empathetic and compassionate. Pisces are deeply empathetic and often feeling the emotions of others as their own, which fuels their compassionate nature, right? They can empathize very deeply with other people, right? Pisces is a boundaryless sign. And with that comes, its own set of issues, but also its own set of gifts as well. Artistic and creative. The sign is highly artistic, often expressing themselves through music, art, writing, performance, like Hollywood, right, is film, things like that, interpretive type things. Intuitive and spiritual. Pisces are known for their strong intuition and interest in spiritual or mystical aspects of life, right? It's that boundarylessness with them. Dreamy and idealistic. They can be dreamy and idealistic, sometimes getting lost in their old world or unrealistic aspirations, which is not always the case, but it's definitely something that is a little bit more common. Okay, so before we talk about this, I'm going to check in with the chat. Let's see. Yasmin says, I don't think you can see your screen anymore. If you can't see my screen, maybe go out and come back in and see if that works. Yes, Irene, there will be a replay. Okay. Oh, it was in full screen and it wasn't showing. Okay. Okay. No worries, Yasmin. I'm glad that you got it fixed. Okay. So now we're going to be talking about the Jupiter-Saturn cycle in 20 years in the making, right? Um, Jupiter and Saturn come together approximately every 20 years. We say 20 years, but it's actually like 19.93 or 98. It's not quite 20 years, but it's really close. So we just round it to 20. And they're considered major markers for social and economic trends, right? So, and the reason I wanted to bring up the cycle is because in comparison, when we're looking at, say, the solar lunar cycle, we see that every month. We see the sun and the moon coming together. We see the opening square. We see the full moon. We see the closing square, right? So that first and third quarter square moon, we see this, but it's on that everyday kind of level, right? We can visibly see the moon getting bigger in the sky. We don't necessarily see like, Jupiter moving away from Saturn and getting bigger in the sky, right? That's not a thing. That's not what they do. But it is a much longer cycle that can carry through time, right? So it's one of those things where it's when you're looking at cycles of planets when they're together, you can, right? So Jupiter and Saturn have cycles. Obviously, the sun and the moon have cycles. Mercury and Venus have cycles as well. It's a little bit different because they don't oppose each other, right? They're always traveling with the sun. But Venus and Mars have cycles. Mars and Jupiter have cycles. So there are cycles within cycles within cycles when it comes to planetary conjunctions, squares, oppositions, right? So just keep that in mind when it comes to what we're talking about with Jupiter and Saturn. And the square happens usually between 4 and 5 years after the conjunction. And that's the opening square. Now, the closing square happens about 4 to 5 years after the opposition, right? So it's that same kind of energy where it's like Jupiter, Saturn, new beginnings, seed point, opening square, action, tension, change, right? And then after that, we have the trine, which is about 6 to 7 years after the conjunction. And the closing trine is about 6 to 7 years before the next conjunction. And then the opposition, which is about 9 to 10 years ish after the conjunction, right? So we do have the opposition coming up in 2030, which is kind of interesting. We can talk about that after. I did not include that or the slides for that in this. All right, the Great Conjunction. Who's excited to talk about this? So this cycle began in 2020. And so Aquarius as a sign that we talked about, right, is humanitarian in nature. It's about the masses. It can be about independence and dogma and all of that. But this particular one marks a significant shift into the air signs, right? Because for the last several cycles, Jupiter and Saturn have come together in the earth signs. And so it's a 200-year cycle in the earth signs. We had the blip in Libra in 1980, kind of beginning that, ushering us into the air signs. And then we had the other conjunction in Taurus, right, in 2000. So now we are firmly in the air conjunctions when it comes to Jupiter and Saturn. And this conjunction, specifically in Aquarius, is believed to herald the focus on technology, right? We saw what was going on with AI and all of that, and how that started to really explode. Innovation, social justice, and community, all typical Aquarian ideals, right? So this period has been marked by significant technological advances and heightened awareness of social issues. That is definitely something that we have seen. we saw the emergence of top-down control over the populace, not just the United States, but in the world. Forced coercion by governments of experimental gene therapies, limitations upon movement within society, travel prohibited and banned in some instances, right? Jupiter is that wanting freedom. Saturn is that no, you're not going to do it. The square aspect occurring approximately 45 years after or before the conjunction challenges themes established by the conjunction, right? Often forcing action or resolution. So in this instance, there could be a crisis in terms of the status quo from the previous conjunction that happened in Taurus, right? So now we're in this new one. We are trying to shed that energy and move into this new Aquarian energy that we had the conjunction in. Excuse me, I'm gonna take a drink of water here. So now with this opening square after the 2020 conjunction, this square continues to test emerging themes of technology, equality, right? We've seen that. I'm not trying to bring in political things and like issues and get people fired up. It's an observation of this is what's happening, right? Because of the planets that are involved, it shows what goes on, right? Social justice, community innovation, right? We've definitely seen a lot of community innovation with this. The signs of Gemini and Pisces lend to the mutation of this cycle and an emerging subduing of the masses. We've seen a rise in homelessness, burdens and limitations set upon the masses, right? So there's been a lot of like top down kind of, you can't do this anymore, you can't do that anymore, those types of things, along with emerging technologies and vociferous discontent. I don't know why I wrote that specific word, but when I was typing this out, that's what came to mind. Vociferous discontent. So people getting really loud about their opinions with Jupiter, right? And outspoken communities against top-down control and social issues. These astrological alignments serve as checkpoints where the established norms and structures are tested and often transformed or mutated, right? So we had the conjunction in Aquarius. Now we have the opening mutation, as I'm going to call it, just because it's in the mutable signs, and mutation and mutable kind of go together. We have to adapt. We have to change something. And we have to be able to do that without kind of losing the essence of what the conjunction was about. So they reflect a dance between expansion, which is Jupiter, and restriction, which is Saturn, playing out in various forms on the world stage. Okay. All right, so this is the conjunction that happened, right, in 2020. This was December 21st. This is the solstice. This chart, just as a note, is based on Eastern Daylight Time. This is, or Eastern, I should have just put Eastern Time in New York because that's where I live and that's where I cast the charts from. And so this is the exact conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn. For the month, just about, of December, they were traveling together less than a degree apart at 29 degrees of Capricorn. So this conjunction really spans two signs, if you want to think about it, because in some instances they're at the same degree. Some people think that the same degree is a conjunction, and they were conjunct until the first degree of Aquarius from the 29th degree of Capricorn. But when it comes to the exact degree, minute, second, that conjunction is inception point, as far as I'm concerned, just because that's how I operate. But they were traversing two signs together. 2020 saw them almost come together, right? In the beginning part of the year, they got very, very close together, but then Jupiter's retrograde cycle happened and they started to move apart again, right? And then they really came together at the end of the year. So this is that. And it's one of those things where that whole year was kind of marked and leading up to this conjunction that happened. And then the subsequent 2021 was the inception point and moving forward, right? So if we keep that in mind. All right. I'm going to check in the chat, see how you all are doing. Let's see. Yes, Linda, 0-degree conjunction. Yes, I can talk about that. So the 0-degree mark is a critical degree in astrology. It is the most potent energetically of the sign that it's in, right? So that 0-degree mark is brand spanking new energy, right? And I don't know why I said it like that. Channeling my mom must be. But it's very brand new energy. It's something that has yet to be explored and something that has yet to be really gone through. So the potential of the 0-degree is the potential really of the entire sign of the sign that it happens in, right? So there's not like the influence of, well, you're over halfway through the sign, so it's been there, done that. No, this is brand new energy. And so it's very fixed at this 0-degree mark. Let's see. Let's see. Marion says conjunction on the Cap moon coming up with Pluto. What do you mean? Louisa likes vociferous. Yes. It's a good word. Let's see. I'm just trying to scan down through here. Let's see. Marianne says Cap being a Saturn ruled sign. Yeah, Capricorn is a Saturn ruled sign. And so they were definitely traversing together through that. And we saw what happened that year, right? And then the following year after they came together, we have historical data and historical events that we can look at, right? Which we're not going to do right now. This is about the Saturn square, but you can't be informed of kind of the present without knowing the past, right? Oops. All right, so now we're going to get into the previous squares. So this is the journey that we take when we look at the past to inform us of the present. So April 2nd of 1986, the opening Jupiter-Saturn square in Sagittarius and Pisces, right? So this was based on the conjunction in Libra, again, an air sign. And there was only one pass of this square due to the retrograde cycle of Jupiter and Saturn. So nothing happens in a vacuum. As a side note, at the time of the square, Pluto was conjunct the South Node in Scorpio. So the Chernobyl disaster happened on April 26th of 1986, right? So the same month that Jupiter and Saturn came square exact, that event happened. So the catastrophic nuclear accident at the Chernobyl power plant in Ukraine highlighted severe flaws in safety protocols, right? A Saturn theme of restriction and consequences, and had extensive environmental and health repercussions, a Jupiter theme of expansion, and in this case, an expansion of the disaster, right? So again, nothing happens in a vacuum. Pluto was with the South Node at the time in Scorpio. Still, right? Themes are there. The United States bombing of Libya. This happened in April of 1986. This military action ordered by President Reagan was intended to curb Libyan state-sponsored terrorism, right? So an expression of Saturnian limits and control, but also escalated tensions and expanded conflict, right? Like Jupiter's expanding on that. Halley's Comet, you guys. I remember Halley's Comet. I don't remember the Chernobyl disaster or the bombing of Libya, but I do remember Halley's Comet. The return of Halley's Comet was a significant event in astronomy, drawing global attention. The themes of exploration and discovery, Jupiter, right, themes, were tempered by the scientific and practical challenges, Saturn, involved in studying the comet, right? And Hands Across America event. This happened in May of 1986. So again, around the time of these planets coming exact and coming square, This was a public event aimed at raising awareness and funds to fight hunger and homelessness in the United States, showing a Jupiter theme of social generosity and community spirit, meeting Saturn themes of societal structure and the need to address serious social issues, right? So Jupiter was in Pisces at the time, right? Saturn was in Sagittarius. So that whole, these themes of Saturn, right? Government, Saturn can definitely represent the government at times. In Sagittarius, which is foreign, right? Foreign powers traveled at a distance of you. Jupiter, Pisces, humanitarian, masses of people, right? All of these events affected a lot of people, positive, right? And challenging and negative, right? So this is from 1986. Let's see. Lucinda says, what's the significance for those of us born with the Libra conjunction? Anyone born in the early 1980s, right, is going to like 80, 81, 82, or not necessarily 82. Jupiter had moved into Scorpio by then, but 80 and 81, you have this, you carry this. So it's the air sign, right? So it's about, what is Libra? Libra is about relationships and relating. It's also about law, right? It's about the balance of justice, right? So there's definitely a lot of things going on with that, and it's a little much to get into detail here, but the conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn in Libra was very much, you saw quite a few laws, right? And actually in 1986, that's when the government, I didn't put it in here, I probably should have, the United States government repealed the vaccination laws here in the United States too, and stopped holding the pharmaceutical companies accountable for any detrimental side effects that the vaccination caused to children. And so that's definitely something that happened here. Sagittarius and Pisces energy squaring. But when it comes to having the conjunction in your natal chart, that's definitely something to look at too in a natal reading as well, because there's other things that are going on in the chart, and it depends on, yeah, it depends a lot on the houses where you have the conjunction for sure, and other aspects too that are going on with it. But in general, people that are born under the Libra conjunction, there's definitely overarching themes of, you know, relationship and justice and fairness and all of that with Libra as well. Okay. Let's go, oops, go on. Is this? Yep. Okay. So this is the first pass of the Jupiter-Saturn square with Saturn in Leo and Jupiter in Scorpio. And this is from the Taurus conjunction that happened in 2000. So this is December 16th of 2004. And around the time, and you can look at, you know, the entire year, right? Because there is that approaching and then the separating, or you can look at within a month or two surrounding the actual event of them coming square. And that's what I did here, because I didn't want to overwhelm everyone with all kinds of facts. If you want to do that, you can research on your own and come up with, you know, what else went on. The Indian Ocean earthquake and tsunami. This is December 26th of 2004. Although technically at the very end of December of 2004, this catastrophic event had a profound impact well into 2005. The tsunami affected multiple countries around the Indian Ocean, resulting in over 230,000 deaths, right? The scale of the disaster, Jupiter, right, in Scorpio, and the subsequent response and recovery limitations, Saturn in Leo, right? Leo has associations with leadership and authority. Saturn, authority, governments, top down, reflect the tensions between the expansion and the restriction, right? Of what's going on there. The Kyoto Protocol, I think that's how I pronounce it, came into effect in February 16th of 2005. And so this is, again, within a couple of months. This international treaty aimed at combating global warming, right? So the conjunction happened in Taurus. What is Taurus? Taurus is the energy of the Earth, right? Especially, and this is what happened here. Jupiter's themes of growth and global cooperation, and Saturn's theme of imposing restrictions to manage and mitigate environmental damage. Again, Jupiter's in Scorpio, right? Scorpio rules over toxicity, Leo, leadership, Saturn, governments, right? So they decided to make rules and regulations, and especially Jupiter involved there too, right? To try to mitigate the damage of, environmental damage around the world, which I don't see that as really helping just where we are today. And also the second Palestinian intifada. I had to look that up, by the way. Though it began earlier, the intifada continued into 2005. The conflict between Israel and Palestine over territory and sovereignty, Saturn's themes of boundaries and restrictions, juxtaposed with the hopes for peace and autonomy, Jupiter's themes of expansion and justice, right? So this was the first pass. And so we have two more to look at here. Marion says, I remember the tsunami. It was intense. Yeah, 230,000 people. That was a lot of people to lose their lives. Yeah, that was definitely, and that whole, yeah, it was a lot. All right, the second pass of Jupiter and Saturn square, right? Saturn is direct now and Jupiter is retrograde. Again, this is the square from the conjunction that happened in Taurus. Montenegro independence. This happened in May of 2006, so just before they came exact again. Montenegro voted in a referendum for independence from the state union of Serbia and Montenegro on May 21st, 2006, and subsequently declared independence on June 3rd, right? So again, we're leading up to that square. This event fits the Jupiter theme of sovereignty and freedom and independence, and the Saturn theme of formalizing boundaries and structures. The North Korean missile tests, right? This happened in July of 2006. So North Korea conducted a series of missile tests on July 5th of 2006. This is just a couple of weeks, right? After that square came exact, which included testing long-range missiles. This act represented a significant challenge to international stability and peace, Saturn's restrictions and limits, and had widespread geopolitical repercussions, prompting discussions, right, about expansion of military and diplomatic controls, Jupiter's broad influence clashing with Saturn's contraction. Right, so definitely not the nicest things in the world for this one, but it was right in Leo and Scorpio, so it's kind of intense. Israel-Hezbollah war, so July of 2006, also known as the 34-Day War. This conflict started on July 12th of 2006, and the war was marked by extensive military operations and significant civilian displacement. And so this symbolizes Jupiter's expansive force in the form of conflict escalation, right? Especially in Scorpio, power control, those types of things. Saturn's restrictive force in the destruction and sorrow, right? So Saturn can definitely be that more melancholic kind of influence, and as well as the subsequent call for stricter border controls and peacekeeping efforts in that area during that time. So that was the second pass. Let's see. Oops. Okay. And the final pass happened in October 25th of 2005. And so both planets are now direct. It's the final one, and then they're going to move on. Again, with North Korea, nuclear tests in October of 2006. North Korea announced it had conducted its first nuclear test on October 9th, right? So just prior to this coming exact the final time, kind of closing out that little bit of a cycle. This event is a stark representation of Saturn's themes of limits and consequences, with Jupiter's influence seen in the broad geopolitical ramifications and the escalation of regional tensions, right, in that area especially. Saddam Hussein's death sentence happened as well right after this in November of 2006. Sorry. Oh, I wrote it down wrong. It was 2006, not 2005. Sorry. Former Iraqi President Saddam Hussein was sentenced to death by hanging after being convicted of crimes against humanity by an Iraqi court. This event highlights Saturn's themes of justice and retribution, while the global reaction to the verdict and its implications for Iraq's future mirror Jupiter's expansive influence. And then the midterm elections, right, in the United States. So the United States midterm elections held on November 7th resulted in significant changes in the US Congress, with the Democratic Party taking control of both the House of Representatives and the Senate. This shift reflects Jupiter's theme of expansion in terms of changing political ideologies and Saturn's influence on restructuring political power and accountability, right? So that is definitely something that we can look at in terms of themes that can happen now, because we are in an election year. Is it going to swap? It's a good question. Let's see. Tiffany says, totally had to look that up too. Intifada is an Arabic word that literally means shaking off. And in the Palestinian context, it is understood to mean civil uprising. Yes, I had to look that up. I was like, I don't know what this word means. And let's find out. Okay. Okay. So now we are coming to this square. Okay. And this is happening on August 19th of this year. So we're about a month out from this happening, right? And so again, this is based on Eastern time in New York, of when it comes exact. And you can obviously cast the chart in your area for your time. Just some things to know is that Venus is involved in this. It is creating a T-square with Jupiter and Mars. So T-squares in and of themselves are malefic in nature. The fact that Venus is in its fall position and Jupiter is in detriment, I don't necessarily like this when it comes to like potentials with laws and lawmakers. I do wonder about healthcare with this one, specifically because of the Virgo Pisces axis that it's in with Gemini and Jupiter, or I guess we have a thunderstorm coming in, guys. So hopefully send lots of prayers that we don't lose our power here. That was a big boom. With Jupiter with Mars in Gemini, right? So we have both benefics, Venus and Jupiter, and both malefics, Mars and Saturn. Mars and Saturn in square can be very intense and very frustrating at times. With Jupiter, right? Mars with Jupiter, this is Mars, especially in Gemini, is very go forward and do, right? Because it's in an air sign and Mars is a fiery planet. So air and fire work really well together. And Jupiter here is going to be expanding on that. Now with Saturn, squaring this at this time, it can definitely be, trying to push through and do what you need to do. But you're coming up against roadblock after roadblock after roadblock, because Saturn is like, no, you need to slow down. You need to do this the right way. You need to not do this the fast way and mess it up. With Venus here in its fall position, and carrying the signification of, where the South Node is transiting at this time, Venus does carry significations of karma too, as well, right? So it could mean that there's something that we need to work through, something that we need to integrate, something that we need to bring in terms of either past experiences or it's something that we are letting go of, right? And so there could definitely be some themes around this, around letting go, and even moving, potential shifts, I would say, too, with the geopolitical US election, but also, right, like laws and lawmakers. That's why I brought in the healthcare, because of the Virgo Pisces access there as well, and morality, right? So people could definitely be very fired up about something that's going on either in the health industry or the health fields, if you will. And, this square is kind of getting super intense with this. And T squares, like I said, are more malefic in nature. So it's going to be I would say it's definitely going to be a mixed bag. Jupiter and Venus are not functioning as well as they could be. But it's definitely things that are workable, right? Because people that are born with planets in detriment or fall, it's not like they can't do anything with the planet. You can, you just have to follow specific rules and things like that. The other thing that's going on too, right? Nothing happens in a vacuum. This is a full moon. This is a full moon in Aquarius. And Pluto is activating that 0 degree point of where they came together in 2020. So we can definitely see massive changes with the inception, with what was seeded at that time, right, of the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction, and a transformation as well in dynamic in different ways, especially because of the trine with Uranus. But with this full moon, there's a T square to Uranus as well at this time that these planets are coming exact. So there's definitely some shock and awe things that can happen, definitely with leadership. And, it could even have to do with the masses and the farming community, things like that, food for people. I definitely think if there is a natural disaster, right, there could definitely be some outcry around help that is provided from authority figures like the Red Cross or the what is it called? FEMA, right? Things like that. So the other thing that I wrote in here is draft implementation for women. I do wonder about that with what we've seen in the political climate as well, just because, Mars being involved and all of that. Let's see. What are you all saying? Let's see. Peggy says roadblocks to changing healthcare may be positive depending who becomes our next president. Right. It could be. It's not all going to be negative and, world ending and all of that, right? Like there's going to be it's not just one thing. It's going to be multiple expressions of what these planets are doing. And depending on where you are in the world, depends on how, that's expressing. Also depends on your natal chart and how it's hitting your natal chart. All of that. Let's see. Peggy says roadblocks to, oh, no, I already read that. Janice says we are integrating the feminine male strands. Okay. Molly says oh, no, that's a personal question. Let's see. Molly, it will affect you a little bit differently. Yes. Let's see. Peggy says in California, a lot of towns do not. Whoop, whoa, what did that do? Peggy says in California, a lot of towns do not want to adhere to housing policy for expansion because they don't want to change their neighborhood. Ah, Peggy, that Gemini, Jupiter, Mars, Gemini. Yeah. Yeah, I can definitely see that happening. Let's see. Breck says, wondering how this would work with an anaretic rising. Um, okay, I'm gonna skip over the personal astrology questions, you guys. I have a PDF that I'm going to be sending out after with the video, asking you questions for you to be able to put it together. Let's see. Marion says Jupiter and Gemini can be expansion of local community unity. Yes, very much so, Marion. I've seen that. I have definitely seen that quite a bit. Let's see. Bridget says, what are the rules you mentioned that need to be followed for planets to function in detriment or fall. It depends on the planet, right? It depends on what we're talking about here. So if we look at Venus, right? Um, Venus is a planet. It's not one that operates well with strict rules, but it is one that is more creative in nature. In Virgo, this can be an expression of being organized, being orderly, right? Venus in Virgo is one of those things where it can express itself through making sure, right, that the people that we care about and our connection, right, to them, that we're being of service to them in a specific way. Does that make sense? And I don't want to get too specific, right, because it's going to be different for every person how it shows up. But Venus in its fall, right, is going to express a little bit differently here than like if you have this in your natal chart, right? Like it's going to express in a specific way based on to the other aspects that are going on to it. But Venus in general is of service when it's in Virgo, and it's very particular about how it gets things done and what it does, right? So it's definitely one of those things where people can it can even be, showing up and helping people with their health through like herbs and things like that. That can be one expression of it. But it can also be showing up in service to other people in a specific way. Okay. All right. So that's the first pass, you guys. And so definitely with Jupiter and Gemini, one of the things that I was thinking of too is like the municipalities, right? When we're talking that Sagittarius and Gemini axis, municipalities is definitely the small scale, right? And then you have, of course, Sagittarius, which is at a distance, either other countries or, across the country from you, that type of thing. Different backgrounds. Whereas Gemini too, with Jupiter here, and I do wonder about the immigration stuff that's going on too. Depending on where you're located, depends on how many, for one, how many people are homeless, because that's definitely a thing now. But also how many people are coming in that are, immigrants or refugees from other countries, right? So depending on where you live, either in the United States or out of, there are influxes of whole groups of people that are, being cast out of their homes and having to migrate to varying places. So I do wonder if this is going to also be something to do with the diversity of what's going on in the municipalities, in the communities, in the local communities, and it can cause some friction. Okay, let's see. Okay. Carissa says, with Saturn retrograde, can you talk about how it's different versus if it was direct? So Saturn retrograde is Saturn retrograde, when it comes to something that I've noticed like outside of personal astrology, it tends to be a little bit more controlling and more Saturnine, right? Because if we're looking at it from the point of view that Saturn is actually closer to the Earth when it's in retrograde, it's not necessarily that it's in retrograde, right? It's that it's closer to the Earth. So the speed of the planets, right? And so it can be a little bit more Saturnine. It can be a little bit more restrictive, a little bit more controlling, a little bit more, intense in the sense that it's going to say no to a lot of things. And Jupiter retrograde, yeah. Jupiter retrograde is more of an internalized understanding, right? It's taking the events and the things that have happened and internalizing them and understanding the bigger picture of it, but not talking about it or not doing anything with it. It's an integration, is that the right word? It's an integration of the knowledge that you of the experience that you've gone through. Does that make sense? Okay, good. Marianne, I'm glad that made sense the way I worded that. Okay. Now we're going to enter the twilight zone. When I was doing my research, I was like, 2 Saturn and Jupiter squares is not enough. I need to look at one more, right? I wanted to look at 3. That's when things got weird or strange. Um, right. And so this is information that I wanted to share with you as well. But I wanted to look at the first Jupiter-Saturn square that we're going to be going through next month first, before we look at this one. Okay. This is July 6th of 1965. Jupiter and Saturn are in Pisces and Gemini at the same degrees that they're going to be next month. So talk about definitely wanting to look at what was happening around the time of the Jupiter-Saturn square at this time. This Jupiter-Saturn square came about from the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction at 24 degrees of Capricorn. And so there was only one exact pass. Obviously, this time around, we're going to be getting 3 hits of it. So it's not going to be as intense, right? Like it shouldn't be. But it's definitely going to, I think, be some similar themes in a different way, because at the time of this Jupiter-Saturn square, we can see that we have Pluto and Uranus in opposition to Saturn and squaring Jupiter. We can also see that the North and South Node are transiting Gemini and Sagittarius for this Jupiter-Saturn square. And so the themes are not going to be, I think, as intense, just because this was only one pass. Pluto was involved, Uranus was involved, and the nodes were involved in this particular Jupiter-Saturn square. So some things that happened, obviously, the Vietnam War was going on at this time, and this was an escalation. So in July of 1965, President Johnson announced a significant increase in US troops being sent to Vietnam, escalating American involvement in the war. This represents Jupiter's expansive nature in terms of escalating military actions, right? And Saturn's restrictive and disciplining influence through warfare and its consequences. So with this opposition, or this technical, T-square going on with Pluto and Uranus as well, like there was a lot of outcry too about the Vietnam War, right? There's a lot of controversy about it, where people were protesting, and people were, being expressing their feelings in a certain way about what was going on with this conflict at the time. So the influence this time around is going to be a little bit different, because instead of Pluto and Uranus and the nose, it's going to be Venus. But it's also going to be Mars with Jupiter. So it's going to be an interesting one. Also, I think it's Sarum C or Karam C. I don't know how to pronounce this. I do apologize if anyone does know how, and I'm murdering it. A major earthquake struck the Sarum Sea in Indonesia on July 26th of 1965. It generated a small tsunami, and was one of the significant seismic events of that year, reflecting Saturn's themes of upheaval and structural change, contrasted with Jupiter's broad and far-reaching effects, right? That is a thing. Louisa says, we don't really have 2 very big war scenarios open right now, so nothing at all to worry about. I mean, it's going to be different though, because Pluto was involved in that last one, right? Yamil says, I am fully convinced that our owners apply all of this knowledge for their large cosmic monopoly. I mean, look, I know they use astrology. There's no way they can't. It is way, way too prevalent for them not to. I'm sorry, but no, they use it. They have astrologers. I've dubbed them the dark astrologers because they're helping these people that are in power. Anyway, the Watts riots, right? So August of 1965, this is obviously like a month after the Jupiter-Saturn square happened. A large scale civil disturbance that occurred. It was a riot, occurred in Los Angeles, and it happened in August of 1965. These riots, so there was multiple of them, were a direct result of racial tensions and social inequalities, right? We also have to remember the time frame that we're looking at. This is 1965. This is definitely the civil rights movement. This is African Americans, gays, right, protesting for their rights. There was a riot that happened, showcasing Saturn's themes of oppression and restrictions faced by communities and clashing with Jupiter's drive for justice and expansion of rights, right? So let's see. Marion says, will you be doing a webinar on Pluto by chance? Well, that depends. What do you want to know about Pluto? I can do a webinar on Pluto. Whoops. Ah, and it's going haywire. Technology does not like me today. There we go. All right. Anna says there were massive uprisings. CIA was killing and imprisoning Black leaders. Yeah, Anna, the Black Panthers, I believe. Is that right? Okay. I'm actually gonna try doing this here. All right. So we're back on this. And then also what was going on too, President Johnson enacted the Medicare, right? Passed Medicare into law, right? Saturn and Pisces. Saturn has domain over the elderly. Pisces has domain over, right? In general, it has domain over poisons. It has domain over medicine, right? Chiron is also here at the time. Anna says yes and more. Okay. Yeah, I wasn't alive at this time. So trying to scour the internet for some of this stuff, it gets a little wonky. So Medicare, the elderly, healthcare for insurance, or healthcare for insurance, federal health insurance for the elderly. So this legislation reflects Jupiter's themes of expanding care and support, countered by Saturn's structure in the form of organized governmental programs, right? So it makes sense that this happened around this time. And they were able to, and nowadays, right, like it's kind of a joke because even elderly on Medicare can't afford their prescriptions. Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965, this happened in October, so a few months out from this. But signed in October, but influenced by the prevailing attitudes during these months, this act eliminated national origin quotas in immigration law. It represents Jupiter's influence in broadening horizons and including more diverse populations, and Saturn's role in structurally changing the legal landscape, right? And we also have to remember this was only one pass. There were not 3 passes of reevaluation or anything like that. This was one pass, done. And then the space race, right? So throughout 1965, the space race was a prominent theme highlighted by various missions, including the Gemini 5 mission in August, which set a new space endurance record. This aligns with Jupiter's quest for exploration and expansion beyond known limits, while Saturn imposes rigorous checks, disciplines, and planning necessary in space exploration. Look, the more I get into the charts of what was going on during the space race, during the moon landing, all of that, the more I am convinced that it didn't happen. And I know that's a conspiracy theory, but Saturn in Pisces, I have a hard time believing it. Anyway, that's my 2 cents. All right, back to our regularly scheduled program. So based on that, now we're going to look at the second pass and then the third pass. And I do apologize. I am going over. This is going to be a little bit longer than an hour and a half. So I'm sorry. But I want to cover everything that I've laid out. And that's what we're going to do. So in this chart specifically of this second pass, there's another T-square happening. So Mercury is in Sagittarius at the other end of this, square that's going on between Jupiter and Saturn. Mercury is in its detriment. Jupiter is in its detriment. However, it's called a mutual reception because Jupiter is in Mercury sign and Mercury is in Jupiter sign. So there is support. Technically, Saturn in Pisces is also supportive of Jupiter in Gemini. However, with Saturn's influence and the fact that Jupiter is retrograde at this time, this to me could be repealing of or I don't know if you guys can hear the thunder around me, but it's kind of intense. I'm trying to ignore it, but some of them are close. Repeal or renegotiate decisions, laws, outcomes, right? And so this is after the US election. So I do wonder if there's not going to be, right, arguments, disputes, if there's not going to be a repealment, right? Jupiter is retrograde, so there is a big reevaluation going on with laws at this time, right? Jupiter does have associations with the law specifically. And with Mercury involved, there can be a lot of debate, a lot of communication, arguments, dissent, things like that. Letting go of certain structures, right? Organizations, top-down control. Saturn is now direct, right? So the first pass, we had Saturn retrograde. Saturn is now direct and moving forward. Now it's Jupiter in retrograde. So taking kind of those hard situations that we were in during the first pass and integrating them and turning them inward in order to evaluate the long-term, right, structures that we are facing, the long-term changes too that we're facing. I wonder too with this, because in doing my research, something like an ad popped up or like a story popped up. China now has flying cars, you guys, by the way. And I do wonder if at around this second pass, if China is not going to launch them for urban use and implementation. They've already had their test runs and been successful with it. And it's called the AE200. So if you want to research what these are, they're called AE200 Chinese flying cars. You can go research those. At the same time that this is going on too, we are having nodal activations, right? So at this time, the sun is squaring the nodes during this Jupiter-Saturn square, the second pass. The sun is at 3 degrees of Capricorn, right? So it's in one of Saturn signs. So is Venus, right? And so there's kind of, when it's called dispositor, right? Everything goes back to the planet that rules that sign. What is that planet doing? So Jupiter is involved in this T-square. With the sun here, I do wonder, especially, the sun has domain over leaders and leaderships, people that are in positions of authority, right? And it's squaring the nodes. So I do wonder if there's not going to be conflict of some kind when it comes to, it could be who the elected president is, or is there a president at this time? I'm not 100%. I'm not a mundane astrologer, but there are themes that we can look at in the past to inform us of the present. Okay, so do you have, let's see, any comments? Whoops. All right, I guess I moved it to the final pass. Let's see. Johan, you have to go. Okay, bye, Johan. Thank you so much for being here. And you will catch us on the replay. All right, so this is the final pass, and this is coming in June of 2025, right? This is just before America's Independence Day. This one is kind of interesting. So this final pass, we have moved out of Jupiter being in its detriment. Now Saturn is in its fall position, right, of Aries. Saturn does not do well in Aries. Aries is a fiery, fast, do what you will kind of sign, go forward and pioneer and, you know, break away and break ahead and do what you need to do, where Saturn is more limitations, restrictions, those types of things. It's also with Neptune at this time. And so the fact that Neptune is here in Aries, you know, and Saturn is here as well, I do wonder about a tsunami around this time. And do you all remember when the story came out of Poseidon, which is an unmanned submarine that has a nuclear, it in essence has a nuclear bomb on it, but its purpose is to cause underwater earthquakes, to cause tsunamis? Do you guys remember that story, or am I just going crazy? I remember that story when it came out. Yelena says she recalls. Okay, good. I'm not the only one that remembers that. So I do wonder, especially with Jupiter in Cancer, right? That's another water sign. Jupiter is in exaltation, by the way, but Saturn is still in the superior position. And when we're talking, when I say superior position, it rises above the horizon first. It's a traditional Hellenistic technique. And what this means is that that is the planet that has more power because it's superior to the other planet that it is making an aspect to. So it has more power, right? When you give Saturn more power in the sign of its fall, the chances of it becoming more malefic are higher than average, right? So Saturn, in terms of Aries, it does not function well, right? Because Saturn is where the sun is exalted. So it is more, Saturn is restriction delays, right? It's time and old age, whereas Aries is very fiery and fast in nature. Saturn's not able to function well here. So I do wonder about this, like having a deep water earthquake, whether or not it's Poseidon or whether or not it's just a tsunami that actually happens with this. The nodes have now shifted into Pisces and Virgo, right? So now Jupiter and Mercury are carrying kind of fated significance when it comes to their traversing the zodiac for the duration of the nodes here, right? Because the dispositor of where the nodes are Mercury and Jupiter. Mercury and Jupiter rule the sign of Virgo and Pisces. And so there could be shocking, intense change also in leadership as well. Also at this time of this final square, Mars is in an exact square with Uranus, right? So there can definitely be, you know, intense situations with Mars and Uranus happening. Let's see. Breck says, if Saturn is always a lower degree in a conjunction with Jupiter, then it is always the more powerful component. Not necessarily, Breck, because after the Jupiter-Saturn opposition and Jupiter moving back around to trine Saturn and then square Saturn again for the closing out of this, this particular cycle, Jupiter is going to be in the superior position. Okay, so it makes a difference. So when it comes to Jupiter being in the superior position, Jupiter is going to have a little bit more power. And Jupiter is going to be able to do, right, to be able to bestow upon Saturn its significations, even in trine and square, right? Let's see, Krista says, does having Jupiter in play with the nodes lessen the intensity of Saturn in Aries when the nodes are involved? I mean, Saturn is not going to be in Aries when the nodes are there. They're actually going to cross in Pisces at the very, very late degrees of Pisces. At least that's when I was sorting through, that's what I saw. So it's not going to, they're not going to cross in Aries. They're going to cross in Pisces before they move over. But the other thing that's going on too is that the nodes, the sun is squaring the nodes at this time, right? So the sun is at 24 degrees of Gemini. The nodes are at 22 degrees of Pisces and Virgo. So again, we have kind of that in between karmic activation of the lunar nodes, and therefore activation of these planets as well as, you know, the sun in Gemini. And that's why I say I do wonder, you know, about a change in leadership, because Gemini is a dualistic sign. It is kind of that. So I do wonder, with everything that's going on currently in the climate of the world, if there's not going to also be like an escalation of conflict and things like that, right? So that those are possibilities. Okay. So potentials. So based on everything that we've reviewed thus far, we can possibly see a major natural disaster happen. We can see an escalation in existing conflicts, right? Because we have seen that. And like in the previous ones where North Korea was testing its missiles and then it said it tested a nuclear device, right? We can see posturing and things like that as well. Governmental regulations, laws, mandates, immigration, and healthcare, definitely with, you know, the access of that's being activated in terms of, you know, the mutables especially. But really the sorry. I'm talking too much, you guys. My throat's starting to get dried out. Pisces and Virgo access, as well as the, you know, the Gemini and Sagittarius access. It's the mutables definitely have a lot to do with that. And then, you know, riots or public unrest, right? Public outcry, public unrest, in the United States especially, right? Just because of the whole political climate. And unfortunately, that bleeds over into the rest of the world, when it comes to, you know, the weird, crazy stuff that happens in the United States. It tends to bleed over to the rest of the world, unfortunately. Not to say that the rest of the world isn't going to have their own set of issues, but, you know, there's definitely plot twists incoming, and possibly, you know, natural disasters and things like that. Swings in political climate in the United States, especially with the US elections being this year, and the first and second pass coming before and after the elections happening. I did have a question here too, just because the Jupiter-Saturn square, the first square, is the same as 1965. If there's going to be another space race, or if we're going to see something with aliens this time around, right? Just because. And then of course the technological changes, right, with China's flying cars, the AE 200, as well as, you know, municipalities and local governments and things like that making sweeping changes across the board. Breck says, please be aliens. Andrew says, definitely aliens. I mean, look, it's possibility, right? And all through this time, that we have these three squares coming exact, Pluto is activating for two of them the conjunction point, right, at that 0 degree mark. So there's definitely themes around transforming the events, the seeding of intent that we had for the long term, right, with the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction into something else and mutating it and transforming it with the mutables and with Pluto there, for sure. Let's see. Marion says ET tech that has been suppressed, or free energy, maybe. That would be awesome if we could use, if they would make Tesla's and several of the other people that have been around that have, you know, made cars run on water and, you know, all of that. If that would all become available, that would be amazing. We would completely transform our world. But the powers that be, I don't think that's going to happen. All right, so what's next after this? So the trine in Leo and Aries, right? So after this square, after this, you know, this kind of back and forth, this push and pull, this expansion in one area and contraction in another, right? And the adaptation that we need to do because of that, we're going to have the trine. And the trine is happening in Leo and in Aries, right? So Jupiter is going to be moving on once it traverses Cancer. It's going to move on into Aries. And this is the first pass is August 31st of 2026. And so this is the chart of that that I have up here. And so Saturn is retrograde. And it is, you know, in trine with Jupiter, which I mean is really positive, I think. The other thing that's going on is that, well, there's more than one, but one of the other things that's going on is that now we have the South Node transiting Leo and we have the North Node transiting Aquarius. So definitely expect more changes over the course of this trine when it comes to changes in leadership, changes in people that are holding positions of leadership. I do wonder if there's going to be more of a push towards a central worldwide government around this time during the trine. The other thing, one of the other things that's going on too, is that Saturn and Mars are squaring. And both of them are in their fall position, which is not necessarily the greatest thing to have both malefic planets in their fall positions squaring each other, right? They're more malefic that way. And so it can definitely be huge frustrations and things like that. Even while all this positive stuff can be going on, there's definitely going to be, you know, frustrations and limitations and arguments and disputes and people butting heads and creating crisis, right? Because it's in the cardinal signs. So there's that too as well. Let's see. Andrew says, I see encroachment on personal boundaries through technology in our homes and our body designed to protect national security using fear and manipulation as usual. Yeah, I mean, it's a pretty prevalent thing to use fear and as to use fear as a manipulation tool. Peggy says, in San Francisco, there are driverless vehicles everywhere. Oh, wow. I think I trust them more than human driven cars. At least autonomous cars stop at stop signs and red lights. This is true, Peggy. This is true. In this world, there are so many distractions going on and so many like people on their phones or people, you know, on substances driving around, running red lights and stop signs. I've seen that prevalent in my area too. We don't have the driving cars though. I think that is definitely, I think we're going to see for sure an expansion of that with technology as it gets more advanced. And you know, the AE 200, right? The driverless air cars. I don't know what to call them. They're just air cars, flying cars. They are also autonomous. They are driverless. So there is that. So even flying cars are driverless. Let's see. Keisha says, yes, I actually agree with the driverless cars being better. Often human distraction, error, and emotion causes most accidents. Yes, it does. Peggy says, a blind person said they like them more than taxi types of cars because they do not have a human in them to harm the individual. Oh, that's super sad that we live in a world where someone would actually harm a blind person. I mean, I know it happens. I'm not naive enough to think it doesn't happen. I know it happens, but that's awful. Lou says, I tend to worry what happens when one of those driverless cars has a bug. I mean, it's bound to happen, right? I mean, look, technology the way it is right now, they can take control of your car currently, right? These 20 whatever cars, they can take control of them. They can shut them down. They can take control and, you know, take them wherever they want as well. Let's see. Louisa says, yes, driverless cars are safer until you are a political enemy and someone bugs your car and stops the wheels when you're on the fast roads. I mean, we live in 1984, you guys. Okay. So this is my, let's see. Whoop. Yep, this is the end of my presentation. So we are done with the presentation part. And so I don't want to go too far over, but I will allow time for Q&A. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen here. Let's see. Let's see. Tiffany says, I think a lot of it as dominance. Its position in the horizon makes it dominant or superior. What are you? Oh, you're talking about the superior. Let's see. Yeah, if you guys have any questions, pop them in the Q&A. And I'll close out the chat and just pop them over in the Q&A and I'll start answering questions over here. Okay. All right. If not covered, can sect be touched on for Jupiter-Saturn? Let's see. Answer live. There we go. Okay. If not covered, can sect be touched on for Jupiter-Saturn in day or night charts? Yeah, so when you are a day chart, Jupiter is the most benefic planet, but Mars is the most malefic planet, right? So Saturn is not as malefic. It can still cause delays, it can still cause setbacks, right? It can still say no, but it's less apt to do that unless there's other circumstances going on, unless there's specific placements and aspects going on with it as well. Goodness, I hope this storm moves on soon. It's loud. And if you're night born, right, Saturn is the more malefic. It can say no. It can cause people, places, and things to stall out. It can cause things to stop very abruptly, right? Forward momentum, no, you hit a brick wall for night-born people. However, I have seen instances, especially Saturn in its home sign of either Capricorn or Aquarius or exalted in Libra in night-born people, where yes, it's the malefic planet. Yes, it causes delays, but it's not as bad as, say, if you're night born and it's in Aries in your natal chart, right? Or in Leo, or, you know, in Cancer. It's definitely one of those things where it might not be as bad, right? So some of the other things too, that we didn't cover here, but in your natal charts, if you have any planets in Cancer or points in Cancer, if you have any planets or points in Scorpio, right? Saturn is going to be trine those placements. So using fortitude, right? Trine aspects, and this is part of the handout that I'm going to be sending with the replay. You know, trine aspects are easy aspects. They are, if you don't, you know, work with those energies, you can miss the opportunities and the gifts that are available to you, right? I mean, yeah, you'll still get them, but if you work with them and you work on them, there it can be more so, right? And then with the air signs, right, complementing Jupiter, we would have Libra and Aquarius. If you have planets or points in there, it's in a trine aspect with Jupiter. It's that expansion and that possibility. And, you know, Jupiter is a planet of hope, right? And so you can definitely utilize that energy and move towards and expand on different things in your life as well, depending on the planet. Okay. Peggy, let's see. Will you talk more about your learning experience with Heather? Heather is an amazing teacher. I was one of her students when she first launched her initial course, right? Which was literally only about the planets, the signs, and the houses and aspects. And as a bonus, right, we got transits. We got a transit lecture. So when she first started teaching, right, I was one of the first few students that were in her courses. And the way she organizes things, right, she's a Virgo sun. The way she organizes things is in such a way that it's easy and logical to follow it through to completion. And then after that, once you learn the basics that she lays out, it's up to you and your own discipline, right? Your Saturn energy of what you do with it and how you go about using it. She is definitely, in my opinion, right? Obviously, I am biased. I help her with her courses and I help teach the students that she pulls into her courses, but definitely highly recommend the Cosmic Academy of Astrology. It's just, I've literally seen other people's lives completely transformed. People that knew nothing about astrology when they came in, and they're giving predictive readings to their clients by the time they're done the course, or after they've taken the course and they've implemented and they've practiced and they're doing the same thing. It's amazing to watch, for sure. And I believe in Heather and her courses and everything that she puts out because she really puts in the work for them, for sure. I hope that answered your question, Peggy. Okay. Do you have any recommendations for this cycle on a personal or individual level? Yes, definitely. When it comes to your personal astrology, right, you want to look at the houses that Jupiter and Saturn are transiting. And I look at things, obviously you saw my presentations. They're in whole sign. You want to look at it in whatever house system you want to use, but you want to look at the house that Jupiter is in, the house that Saturn is in, right? The house that Saturn is in is where you're going to find limitations and delays, is where you're going to find things that are said no to. And it's where you're going to have to kind of struggle, right? If we think about the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in 2020, if you think about it as a caterpillar going into a chrysalis, this is the time that the chrysalis is starting to break open and the caterpillar is now a butterfly struggling to get out, right? So there's a transformation that's happening, but right now we're in the struggle bus portion. So wherever Saturn is transiting in your chart, that's where the struggle is going to be. That's where the limitation is going to be. That's where you're going to have to put in more effort and energy and fortitude and work versus where Jupiter is. Jupiter is going to bring in, it's almost Jupiter, especially in Gemini, is multiple opportunities all at once. And I've seen this in my own life. I've seen this in my partner's life. I've seen this in my clients' lives, where there's multiple things that are happening where Jupiter is transiting right now in Gemini. And people are feeling a little bit overwhelmed and not knowing what to do with it, right? So depending on the houses, depends on how it's going to show up for you, right? So, but definitely work with Saturn, I would say, to say no to the too many opportunities that are coming in, but use Jupiter to be able to expand on those opportunities that you're saying yes to, right? Does that make sense how I worded that? Let's see. Carissa says, I have natal Jupiter in Gemini, and yes, it's a busy energy, hard to focus, just want to learn everything, right? You want to learn and understand it all, right? But it takes time to do that. Let's see. Lo says, I have Saturn retrograde in my third house in Aquarius, and I have noticed that every time Saturn is in retrograde, especially in Aquarius, I have major life events. Yeah, I mean, when Saturn, too, right? If you have Jupiter natally retrograde or Saturn natally retrograde in your chart, when those planets go retrograde, you will find an easier time. You will have an easier time with that energy wherever they're placed, right? Wherever they're transiting. Irene says, I have my moon in Gemini and I too want to learn it all. Gemini is one of those things, right? It's one of those signs where you want it all. Okay, let's see. Please give another example of superior position. So superior position would be, let me see. I'm looking at the charts that I have in the presentation to see. That's not a good one. Oh, maybe this one. All right, let's see. I want to share my screen with you. Okay, so hopefully you can see my cursor. If we're looking at this, we're looking at Jupiter, right, in the sign of Cancer. It is in the superior position of Mars in Leo, down here, right? So Jupiter and its beneficial qualities, especially because it's exalted in the sign of Cancer, in a sextile with Mars, right? It's making an aspect to Mars. Mars's more malefic qualities might not be as malefic, right? So especially with Jupiter, Jupiter can expand on the opportunities, right, of taking action and doing something, right? So sextiles need to be activated in astrology, and usually it's working with another person to get something done, right? So it's kind of the energy of working with another person on either the same project or something that you want to get done, and you're working with each other to complete something. And so with Jupiter here, you know, Jupiter can be laws. Jupiter can be you know, travel. Jupiter can be education, right? Mars can be action or taking action or even cutting something out, right? So um it can either be going towards something and going after something or cutting something out, right? And so Jupiter is in the superior position, more beneficial energy versus, you know, like Mars is a malefic energy, but it's also action and willpower and doing something, right? Mars is always doing something. So it can be that Jupiter can be saying yes to opportunities, for performances, yes to because Mars is in Leo at this time. It can be yes to, you know, changing leadership. It can be yes to those types of things, right? um okay. Yes. So some practical stuff regarding how to turn obstacles into opportunities, like mentioned in the advertising for this webinar. Yeah. So, all right, I'm going to stop sharing. So turning obstacles into opportunities, when you're looking at the limitations of Saturn, when you're looking at the place in your life where Saturn is transiting and where you're having a harder time going through and getting something done, right? It turns into a more, it turns if you flip it, if you flip your script in your brain to like just nothing is happening, I'm not able to do this, right? To, okay, I'm going to give myself this amount of time to work on this. And I'm going to take these steps, right? Saturn loves taking steps. Saturn loves compartmentalizing things and making it step by step by step, right? And working on it, the opportunity of the growth potential with the square, right? Because squares require action. Squares are one of those things where it's you're presented with something or there's some type of outside influence, either, you know, Saturn is limiting you in some way and Jupiter is causing opportunity. That square, you can take hold of that square and do something with it and take action on it, right? Using your higher mind, using where you fit in the world, right? Using your skills even, because Gemini, Jupiter and Gemini, even though it is in detriment, you can learn skills very easily. You might miss some of the details with Jupiter there, right? And it's more about the big picture. But then with Saturn in Pisces, right, of taking something that you didn't necessarily think was could be possible and make it possible with the understanding of these are the steps that I need to take in order to make this happen in my life or in order to start this project or do this education, right? Maybe there's a lack of funds for education or something like that, right? With Jupiter and Saturn squaring where they're squaring, and working towards getting the funds in order to be able to get the education that you want, or getting the funds to start the business that you want to start, right? You have to work with other people. You have to be able to adapt to the changing situations as they present themselves. So those types of things. Does that make sense, Sabina? Okay. Hopefully that makes sense. I do have the chat open too. Let's see. Anonymous says, I would think you would go from the Anima Mundi chart in order of reference for whether is a day or night chart for global events, and the birth date, whatever country you want to see how it will be affected by sect. I think I understand what you're saying. Let's see. I'm gonna reread this. You can also look at, yeah, I think I know what you're saying. So you're saying to look at the Thema Mundi because it's the birth chart of the cosmos, and look at when the country was either, or the town or city or whatever wherever you're living, look at the birth date or the ratification or organization of that town. I think that's what you're saying. Yes, you can do that. But you can also look at the planetary overlay of the global map, right? And see where Saturn is, like the lines, right? The planetary, it's astrocartography, but it's looking at where the planetary lines are in order to see where, certain events can happen too. I'm not proficient with that when it comes to, like I said, mundane predictions, but looking backwards at specific, right, placements and patterns can help. How do you determine which planet is superior? So you determine the superior planet by what's rising on the horizon first, right? So you have the horizon line. Whatever planet comes above the horizon first is the planet that is in the superior position because it's rising first, and then the other planet behind it. Okay, I answered Peggy. That's awesome. I'm glad that I explained it in a way that you could understand. Let's see. Anonymous says, I joined the Academy classes over a year ago, but was unable to finish the live classes with everyone due to car accident. Should I retake the entire course live again, or can I still get help online while redoing the recorded courses on my own? Go back to the course. Whatever course you purchased, right? Go back and start retaking it. And we're there in the community in the Cosmic Academy of Astrology, right? For Heather, we're there in the community, Jen and I, to help out, right? And we still have live sessions that you can attend in terms of the TA sessions and all of that. We're there in the email, we're there in the courses answering questions, we're there in the community answering questions, right? So definitely go back and start over with the course that you already purchased. Okay. Okay, when transit Jupiter conjuncts the natal sun of a person in general, we can say that the person can gain a bit of weight. Not necessarily. Is this still true for Jupiter and Gemini? I think that an air sign Jupiter can't have this sort of an influence as much as it would in an earth sign. Is it actually a good time to start a diet for a Gemini now with the square to Saturn. I mean, yeah, I mean, if Saturn is making an aspect to either your ascendant or your sun, Jupiter is too, right? Saturn can give you the discipline that you need in order to lose the weight. Saturn is all about discipline, right? Jupiter conjuncting the sun might not necessarily um be weight gain. I mean, it depends on you know how your chart is set up and all of that, but the sun is like a very vibrant energy, and Jupiter just expands on that vibrancy. So I wouldn't say that it's necessarily weight gain for that. Okay, let's see. All right. So I know it's 4 o'clock. I do apologize that I went over. Um, I'm just checking in the chat here. Patrice says, if I don't have an exact birth time, but an approximate time, can I still get an accurate reading? Not necessarily. If you don't have an accurate birth time, it would be a lot, that would be what's called a rectification in order to get the birth time exact. And that's not something that I do. The only thing that you can do if you don't have an exact birth time is to look at the general themes of the energies with the aspects that are going on in your chart. You wouldn't be able to really get specific with it or get predictive with it, but you can see the general themes as they relate to your life. um yeah, I don't do, if people will come to me for readings and they don't have an exact birth time and they can't get their hands on their birth chart, if they can't get their hands on their birth certificate and it has an exact time, um then I don't, I let them know that it's not going to be accurate, and that I can only give them the general energies. I can't set the chart up and do anything predictive with them. um Bye, Andrew. So it is unfortunate. Krista says, thank you for your time and knowledge. This was so good. I've been MIA in the academy, but this motivated me to get back in. Yes, good. All right. I love that, Carissa. I'm happy that you're going to get back into it. All right, everyone. That is what I have for you. And if there's no more questions, then we can sign off for the day. So thank you so much. Um, yeah, I hope this helps, and I will be sending the replay out once it's done, and I also will be sending out a handout, so you can put the pieces together for yourself. If you are interested in a birth chart reading, you can always go to my website, apogeeofthemoon.com, and you can book a reading with me. If you're interested in becoming an astrologer, definitely go to astrologywithheather.com, look up the Cosmic Academy of Astrology, and sign up. I'm one of your TAs. Jen is also another of your TAs as well. So thank you. Thank you so much, everyone. And I hope you all have a wonderful time. All right. Bye, everyone.